Act like you love me, please. He broken bar. Her voice trembled as she clutched his sleeve, eyes glistening under the cruel laughter of her ex. The CEO, Ethan Hayes, was used to power, not pity, but something in her desperation cracked his armor. Without a word, he pulled her close, shielding her trembling form. Cameras flashed, whispers filled the room, and suddenly the poor girl everyone mocked became the woman standing beside one of the most powerful men in the city. But when the lights faded and silence filled the car, she couldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she said softly. Ethan stared out the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. "Maybe I needed it," he replied quietly, his voice heavy with something even he didn't understand. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something real, something that didn't come with a price tag. That night replayed in his mind for days. He had met her once before, in the company lobby, carrying a stack of files almost bigger than her. She was just an intern then, shy, polite, invisible to most. He never thought that same girl would one day stand before him, asking him to pretend to love her. There was something about her honesty, her raw fear, that pulled him in. He didn't know why he agreed. Maybe because he was tired of pretending himself. He had spent years playing a role, a perfect CEO, ruthless businessman, untouchable heart. But with her, even the act felt human. The next morning, the tabloids were everywhere. CEO Ethan Hayes defends mystery woman at gala. The world buzzed with gossip, but Ethan didn't care. What bothered him was the way she avoided his gaze in the office, as if afraid to exist near him. One afternoon, he called her into his office. She stood by the door, clutching her bag like a shield. He said simply. Silence stretched. "Why him?" he asked finally. She blinked, confused. "Your ex. Why did you let him treat you that way?" Her lips trembled. "Because I believed him," she whispered. "He promised me forever, but forever ended when I had nothing left." Ethan didn't respond. He just watched her, this fragile, strong, broken girl who reminded him too much of his own past. His father had been like her, charming in public, cruel behind closed doors. Maybe that's why Ethan built walls so high. Maybe that's why he recognized the pain in her eyes before she even spoke. He stood, walked around the desk, and handed her a tissue. "You don't owe anyone your silence," he said quietly. For the first time, she smiled faintly. Days turned into weeks. Ethan found himself drawn to her laughter, to the way she hummed softly while working late, to how she treated even the janitor with respect. She never asked for attention, yet somehow she became the center of his world. He started noticing things he had forgotten, as sunsets from his office window, the sound of rain, the warmth of coffee shared with someone who actually listened. She made him feel like a man again, not just a name in the business pages. One evening, as they walked out of the building together, they saw her ex waiting by the gate. "So this is your new trick?" he sneered. "Trading pity for power?" Ethan stepped forward before she could reply. "Careful," he said, voice low and controlled. "You're standing on company property." Her ex smirked. "And you think she loves you?" Ethan didn't answer. He just took her hand. "Maybe not yet," he said, looking at her with quiet conviction. "But I'll wait until she does." The words left even her speechless. That night, she cried, not from fear, but from the strange, aching hope that maybe love could still find her. Months passed. What began as an act slowly turned into something unspoken but real. Ethan started visiting her small apartment, meeting her little brother, the boy she raised alone after their parents died. The first time the boy called him sir, Ethan smiled and said, "Just Ethan." Soon, the boy called him something else, your family. Every time Ethan saw her cooking, laughing, or reading bedtime stories, a piece of his cold heart thawed. He had built empires, but never a home. With her, he finally understood what that word meant. Then one day, her ex returned again, this time with an apology and a check. "You can start over," he said, placing it on the table. Ethan was about to speak, but she stopped him. She looked her ex in the eye and said, "I already have." She pushed the check back toward him. "You broke me once, but someone taught me that I don't need fixing, I need believing." Her ex left in silence. Ethan stood there, watching her, proud, fierce, and free. He realized in that moment, she didn't need him to save her. She needed someone to stand beside her, not in front. That night, Ethan sat by her side on the balcony as the city lights shimmered below. "You changed me," he said softly. She turned to him, surprised. "How?" He smiled faintly. "You taught me that love isn't something you buy or beg for. It's something you earn by staying, even when it's hard." She took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "And you taught me that not all men leave." Years later, when people spoke of Ethan Hayes, they didn't talk about his wealth or power. They talked about how he built a foundation for orphaned kids, how he never stopped showing up for the family he chose. And sometimes, when the boy, now a young man, looked at him and said, "Thanks for loving my sister," Ethan would smile and whisper, "She taught me how." What started as a desperate plea, "Act like you love me, please," he became the story of two broken souls who healed each other. Not through grand gestures or riches, but through small acts of kindness, quiet faith, and love that expected nothing in return. Because sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings come disguised as mistakes, and the people we pretend to love become the ones we can't live without. Months later, the girl who once begged now smiled as Ethan played with her little brother, the one she had raised alone since their parents passed away. The small apartment was filled with laughter, not luxury, but it felt warmer than any mansion Ethan had ever lived in. He sat cross-legged on the floor, helping the boy build a tower of blocks. "He reminds me of who I could have been," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying a weight of regret and hope. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "And now you can be," she replied, placing her hand over his. In that simple touch, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years: a peace. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to run or prove himself. He just wanted to stay. Every morning after that, life took on a new rhythm. Ethan would leave early for work, but not before making breakfast for them. It wasn't always perfect. He burned the toast more often than not, but the boy laughed each time, calling him Chef Ethan, and that became their inside joke. After years of chasing deals, meetings, and profits, Ethan found joy in something simply: a smile, a shared meal, a quiet goodbye at the door. The girl watched him change slowly, the hard edges softening, the coldness melting away. He was no longer the CEO who commanded rooms with silence. He was the man who read bedtime stories, who fixed broken toys, who found happiness in the smallest moments. One evening, they all went to the park. The boy ran ahead, chasing kites in the golden sunset. Ethan sat on a bench, watching him with a faint smile. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think love was a weakness, something that distracted you from success." She looked at him, curious. "And now?" He turned to her, his eyes soft but steady. "Now I think love is the only thing that makes success worth anything." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. For a man who once lived surrounded by people but felt empty, this simple connection was everything. But life has a way of testing what's real. A few weeks later, her ex showed up again, this time with expensive gifts and hollow words. "I made mistakes," he said, pretending remorse. "Let me fix them." She stood still, her heart steady now. "You can't fix what you broke with money," she said calmly. The man smirked, glancing at Ethan. "And what about him? You think he'll stay when things get hard?" Ethan stood up, his gaze firm. "She doesn't need saving anymore. She saved me." His words cut through the air, strong and true. Her ex looked away, ashamed, and walked off without another word. After he left, she turned to Ethan, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Yes, I did, because I spent years surrounded by people who only stayed when I was winning." "You stayed when I was lost." She smiled faintly. "I didn't stay for what you had. I stayed for who you are." Those words hit deeper than she realized. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked out onto the balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. All his life, he had believed that redemption came from power, from fixing mistakes with money or control. But now he understood it came from love freely given, from forgiveness without conditions. The next morning, he made a decision. He called his assistant and said he wouldn't be attending the board meeting. Instead, he drove the girl and her brother to the countryside, to a small house near a lake. It was quiet, surrounded by trees and sunlight. "Why are we here?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Because I'm tired of living in glass towers. I want to build something real." She looked at him, surprised. "You'd leave everything?" He nodded. "I already did, the moment I met you." The boy ran toward the lake, laughing, and Ethan followed, his shoes sinking into the soft earth. For once, he didn't care about dirt or schedules. He just wanted to live. Days turned into weeks, and they settled into a new kind of peace. Ethan learned to fix things with his hands instead of signing checks of broken chairs, leaky pipes, even a treehouse for the boy. Every nail he hammered felt like a piece of his past being repaired. The girl often watched from the porch, her heart full. She had once begged a man to pretend to love her. Now, she was loved without pretending. Ethan, the man who thought emotions were weaknesses, became the protector of a small family he never expected to have. He no longer hid behind titles or wealth. That he found value in laughter, in shared meals, in morning hugs. One afternoon, as rain poured outside, they sat together by the fireplace. The boy had fallen asleep on Ethan's lap. She whispered, "Do you ever miss your old life?" Ethan looked at the flames dancing before them. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I remember how empty it was. I had everything, except a reason to wake up happy." She smiled, tracing circles on his hand. "You found your reason now." Ethan looked at her, his eyes soft. "I found my home." Years later, their love became something people quietly admired, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. Ethan never returned to the corporate world the same way. Instead, he used his wealth to open a foundation for orphan children, giving them the love and care he once lacked. The girl stood beside him at every event, proud, her brother now grown and helping others like him. Reporters would sometimes ask about their story, how a CEO ended up with a girl from nowhere. Ethan always smiled and said, "She taught me that success isn't about power, it's about people." And on quiet evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon, they would sit outside their home by the lake, watching the reflection of the sky in the water. The boy, and now a young Mona, would joke, "You two are still acting like teenagers." Ethan would laugh, pulling the girl close. "Maybe that's what love does, it keeps you young." She'd smile, leaning her head against his shoulder. In that moment, everything made sense: the pain, the loss, the years of loneliness, because all of it led them here, to this simple, perfect peace. It wasn't a mansion or fame, but it was home. The kind of home built not from walls, but from hearts that refused to give up on love. Ethan Hayes, the man who once thought he had everything, discovered that real wealth was not measured in money, but in the people who stayed, who forgave, and who loved him when he had nothing left to give. And the girl who once begged for someone to pretend to love her had finally found someone who loved her for real, and that was worth more than all the gold in the world.